You're on.
All right, we're going to get going with this evening's program. It is a enclosed glass room, so if there's a lot of sidebar conversation, it's going to kind of ricochet. I'm not telling you to remain church silent, but consider courtesy to others who are going to hear the presentation. I'm David Allner, chair of the WakeLP. This is our first event of the new year for January, and our first event that we've sponsored at Tobacco Road, I think. Does that sound right? I think it is. So anyway, thank you everyone for coming out. I see some new faces. That's pretty exciting. Before we get into our main presentation, I have to just run through a few announcements and things that we have going on. Every month we do a charity event at the WakeLP, and our event is Saturday, 9 February at St. John's MCC, and that's Lunchboxes of Love. That's where we put some lunchboxes together, and they provide them to people who obviously need a meal. For those of you who follow North Carolina politics, I can't go into it over the last 2 years because even the people involved in the process don't understand it anymore, but the Board of Elections is putting together their county groups, and their state group, I think, meets tomorrow probably for the first time. Anyway, long story short, Wake County Libertarian Party has nominated John Byers, Brian Irving, and Amy Howard. So thank you to the state chair who is here, Susan Hogarth, for putting that together, and Brian and Brad for taking that initiative. I appreciate it, so thank you. 2 or 3 other quick notes. Those of you familiar with NORML, they're a group for advocating for legalizing marijuana either recreationally or probably in the state first for medical uses. They are starting or trying very hard to get organized. We do have a couple contacts. If that is something you would be interested in or participating in, or helping them get together and get it organized in Raleigh, please let me know. Tomorrow, 7 p.m. to 8:30, if you are interested in ADUs and e-scooters, local politics is heating up. And that's you and your scooters. That's the district in Raleigh. It's 317 West Morgan Street. So I don't know if that'll be of interest to you. And finally, Steve Baker. Many of you in the room know Steve Baker. He has a David Bowie tribute band. He's really good. He's been run Deep South Entertainment for a number of years, and he's offered to give libertarians free stuff. Private individuals can give away free stuff. Maybe not government should, but individuals can. So there's a concert this Friday at the Ritz. So if you're interested in that, please let me know. All right. Appreciate it.
The state executive committee will be meeting in person in Greensboro February 9th at the with the information we found.
Greensboro, yeah. So the state has a meeting 9 February in Greensboro. Any questions about any of that? All right. All right, so our speaker this evening is Tyler Bonin. He's an instructor at Thales Academy, which most of you know Thales Academy. That's Bob Bloody School, and many fans of Bob Bloody in the room. He also served in the U.S. Marine Corps as a veteran of the Iraq War. He's published articles on politics, economics, and culture in both the Atlantic, the Wall Street Journal, and the Foundation for Economic Education. So I'd like to get Tyler up here, and thank you so much. You managed to get several people from George Mason interested in coming out tonight, so surprise, surprise. I guess for you, I'll be giving some people.
Okay, sounds good. All right, so I do have some handouts. You can take them, you can not take them. It's up to you completely. Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I'll do this.
All right, good evening. My name is Tyler Bonin. Just to tell you again a little bit about myself. Currently, I do teach economics at Thales Academy. That's location in Rollsville. I've also begun teaching at the College of Southeastern, a class in introductory economics, and that's a class that's geared towards individuals who will be moving on to NC State to fulfill the requirements to become teachers, and that's specifically within social studies. It's a brand new program in partnership with NC State. Aside from that, I do write on the side when I get the moment to do so. I've written for The Atlantic, the Wall Street Journal, Foundation for Economic Education, economic and defense issues for Real Clear Defense, and also have contributed to the Washington Examiner. I really wanted to go ahead and kick off with a discussion of my last article in the Washington Examiner. It was entitled, "Why I'm Putting a Debt Clock in My Classroom." Normally when I write, I get some people who enjoy it and they'll send an email my way, and some people who don't enjoy it. However, the response to that last article was overwhelming. Both those who really enjoyed the article and thought that I was doing the right thing. Again, this hasn't actually come to fruition. It's more of a tongue-in-cheek type of piece. But I got an email that said that I am the worst teacher in the world for suggesting that I make my students aware of the fact that it's their future being mortgaged by the government today. And I really took issue with that, right? Because I think sometimes, and I said this previously, that we've become a society that works and operates more off of feelings than we do facts. And a lot of hard choices have to be made, but unfortunately, we're in a system in which there's no incentive to make the right choices, which are in fact the hard choices, right? As long as we have politicians in office who are interested only in re-election and not actually bettering society, allowing more freedom that will allow future generations to interact with each other in a manner that will promote their benefit. So I wanted to go ahead and draw attention to figure 1 on the handout. I've looked at different tables and charts that outline the debt to GDP ratio of countries across the world. This is the more recent one. This is probably my favorite one. Again, I want to apologize for the fact that it's not colored, but the system still stands. The way that this operates is that you have countries with the highest debt to GDP ratio in the center, and as it starts to spiral outward and the countries get smaller, you're dealing with countries that have ever lower levels of debt to GDP. Now, the first country that you have in the middle, it's the largest country. It's not a large country geographically, but on the debt to GDP ratio map, it is. It is Japan. I think right now it stands at 238%. Why is that? Why is that?
I remember they did a lot of modification of the interest rates, so there was a lot of fluctuation. I'm not totally aware, but I know that the central bank did a lot with interest rates and were essentially giving you money to take out a loan and that kind of stuff.
Absolutely, there are probably some market manipulation, but also some other factors involved.
Heavy regulation and socialization of everything.
This is true. This is a country that has regulated heavily they have a wide array of what we refer to as old age social programs, right? And we have the same thing in this country. These are programs that provide pensions to those who retire, provide insurance, health benefits to those retired, and even go so far as to provide familial benefits, right, for such things as caretaking, right? So a very wide social safety net, if you will. But there's a problem, and we're also going to be running into the same problem in this country. If you were to look at a demographic map, a demographic pyramid of Japan, you will notice something, right? It actually stands in opposition to what you would perceive a pyramid to look like. So if you have a traditional demographic pyramid, you would see that the base would be much larger, so that working age population is much larger in proportion to the older population that is retiring. But in Japan, it's quite the opposite. Fertility rates have decreased for quite some time. For quite some time, fertility rates have decreased. So you have an ever-growing retired age population and a decreasing working age population that actually pay into the system of benefits that provides retirement and health care to an aging population, to the old population. And that's a problem, right? That's just a demographic problem. We have the exact same thing in this country. Now, it's not as severe as what's happening, but if you look at demographic pyramids in the United States today, you'll see that we have a growing aging population, and we are not replacing that working age population into the future. The fact of the matter is, fertility is at the lowest rates that they have been in probably about 3 decades. That's just one component of the issue. Now, this is not just a problem in Japan and the United States, this is a problem across the developed world. When you look at the debt to GDP ratios, it's increasing across the world. Governments are spending more, they're taxing more, they're regulating more. Not just in Japan, in China as well. China, if you notice, is conspicuously absent from this debt map, and that's because nobody really knows what their debt truly is. I mean, we can think that we know, but the fact of the matter is that when it comes to regulation, China is pretty far gone. You know, they have a lot of unfunded mandates there. A lot of retirement pensions through their traditional communist program have actually been delegated to local governments, right? So local governments are required to provide the pensions for retiring populations. However, they don't get much tax revenue. So the central government takes in all the tax revenue, says that they have to provide certain programs, but gives them no money. So they have all these unfunded mandates. Local governments are forbidden by the government of China to actually borrow money, but they do it anyway. Through shadow banks, they create these things called LGFVs, local government financing vehicles. They create these shadow organizations that actually borrow on behalf of the government. And this is all to sidestep rampant regulation because they're told to do more with absolutely nothing. So in this country, and that's the main point. Yeah, go ahead.
I have a quasi-employee in China.
Okay.
Speaking now, 26. And the demographic bomb that you're describing,
Right.
it's the same way.
Right.
Because the one-child policy, and you know, she's had all these old elderly family members that she's taking care of, and she's got an incentive. She just got married in October to have a baby now, have a baby now, have a baby now. So the government is telling her to have a baby, and you'll get monetary compensation.
Right.
So it's very weird and simple.
Right. Right. Now it's, again, and then the problem is that China's not, you know, they're a middle income country. They're not a high income country like the United States is, or the UK or other countries that are experiencing this same debt problem. Now, in the United States, and I told my students this, you know, when we look at spending, you know, a lot of times politicians like to look towards, you know, maybe like taking a little bit of skin off the meat, right? They're talking about all these different programs for cut, and I agree with reducing spending, absolutely. You know, but the elephant in the room is that what is going to kill us in the future is the fact that mandatory spending levels are spiraling out of control. Your mandatory spending programs are those programs, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, right? That's the bulk of the budget. That's also subject to this demographic time bomb. the fact that as people start to retire and more people start retiring, the individuals who are working to pay into that system are decreasing in numbers, right? We're producing fewer people today. Social Security, started in the 30s by FDR, was not intended to be the program that it is today. Pension programs are completely out of control. What if I told you that in 2017, we were still paying individuals through the Civil War survivors pension fund? In 2017, granted, that's a nominal amount, they're not controlling for inflation, but in 2017, there was still the daughter of an individual who fought for the Union in the Civil War, and she was getting just under $100 a year through the Civil War survivors pension. In the United States, it's out of control. You look at the Social Security Administration, they're paying benefits out to centenarians at a rate that's much greater than the actual number of centenarians in this country, right? When you have that large of bureaucracy, it's hard to prevent people from taking on the benefits of those who are deceased, even if it's illegal to do so. Accordingly, when you look at Social Security, it was developed as a pay-as-you-go system. What do I mean by that? How many people are here familiar with how Social Security works? All right, so it's a pay-as-you-go system. So those individuals who are paying today are paying for the retirement of those today as well. So every time I look at my paycheck and I look at those FICA taxes, right, I am paying the retirement of an individual today. For years, we run a surplus. So the amount of revenue that we've taken in from workers has been greater than the cost. So we pay out benefits by the year, we retain a surplus, but that surplus goes into a trust fund. And I think a trust fund is a bit of a misnomer, right? Just say it like that. This trust fund is simply going into a system it's funding the government today. So all that surplus from Social Security is paying for everything from education research to aircraft carriers to insects on the mating habits of gnats. Research on the mating habits of gnats. That's the truth. You can look it up, right? So the government is funding itself through a surplus. That extra money that goes into Social Security is used to purchase bonds, special issue bonds. And those are debt instruments that essentially equates to a system of IOUs. So that if you think about maybe having a child who wants to go to college and they're saving up for college and they know that they have to save $1 every week, and then 1 week you put in $1.25. Hey, you're doing well, you have a surplus now, right? You're above that dollar requirement you need each week. But you want to go out one Friday night. You want to go watch a movie with your friends. So you need a little extra cash. You say, it's no big deal. I'm just going to go ahead and take a quarter out and I'll replace it with an IOU. Now that's fine as long as you're running surpluses every year. But we're at a point where we're not running surpluses anymore. Now, we reach that point where we're running a deficit. Our tax receipts cannot match expenditures on Social Security. And the same also pertains to health insurance, Medicare. This problem will only be exacerbated as we go forward. So right now, the debt is approaching $22 trillion. By the time that many of my high school students graduate, or on the other hand, some of my college students graduate in 4 years, you're looking at a point at which debt will truly spiral out of control. That interest on the national debt, in terms of bonds that we issue to fund the government as we go, will be in a category of the budget that will surpass defense spending. It will surpass non-defense discretionary spending. Now, if we go ahead and flip the page as well, if you'll take a look at the federal budget in 2017. This is the best chart that I could find, the best infographic that I could find. You look at discretionary spending. Defense is a part of that. It doesn't. It's not included in mandatory spending such as Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. The issue is that every time we can't fund the government as it is, we go into debt further by issuing treasury bonds. China right now is the largest holder of our debt. Other countries are as well. Whenever these bonds come mature, the only option we have is to continue borrowing, moving into this hole further and further, continuing issuing bonds. Now, if I were to look at my students and tell them that the best way for you to get ahead in life is to borrow money, and when you can't pay that money back, you borrow it from somebody else, and when you can't pay it back, you borrow it from somebody else, and so on, like you're staring through a hall of mirrors, they would look at me like I was freaking crazy. They would know through common sense that's not sustainable. Or if I told them that you could put money into a piggy bank, keep taking it out and just putting IOUs in there for some future date, they would say no, because then I'm screwing future me over, right? But when the government does it, it's all well and good. Oh yeah, deficits are great, right? Every time we've had a budget surplus, we've run into recession. Well, yeah, that's okay, because there's underlying mechanisms that probably need a recession to happen, right? The problem is that this debt level is unsustainable to the point at which by the time my students, again, graduate, or in terms of this room, 4 years from now, we look ahead to the future, interest on this debt will be the third largest item on the budget every year. To the point at which some individuals, some economists believe that we will have to start putting in a payroll tax. Just like we have FICA for Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, a payroll tax intended just to pay down the interest of the national debt. Now that's a problem. Because as we start losing our ability to pay this debt down, we start continuing to issue more and more bonds to pay off bonds that are maturing, we run into a situation where people start losing our faith. The basic tenet of economics is the fact that as investors start losing faith in your ability to pay, interest rates go up. And as interest rates go up, you will see continuing investment, but it'll start to crowd out other investment. That'll actually hamper economic growth and hamper the opportunity for millions of future Americans. The problem is that these programs were never intended to act in the manner that they are. They were never intended to compensate for not investing your money. You know, you look at retirees, 90% of their retirement income is Social Security. And by 2034, the US government will only be able to pay out 3/4 of those benefits. So you're talking about a $1,500 average check. 2034, the average American will be pulling in $1,200. That's not a good situation. When we look to our neighbors at the north, and we think of all the socialist type policies that they implement, well, their national pension fund is an actual trust fund. It is not a situation where you're creating a surplus to fund the current government and buy debt from the government, but it's a real trust fund in the fact that the Canadian pension program is independently governed and is comprised of mainly equity, followed by some government debt, Canadian treasury bonds, and real estate. Same way that Chile does it. They actually invest money for individuals in private equity, some government bonds, and real estate. Had Social Security been an actual trust fund and invested money in private markets, you would have seen an average rate of return over the last 75 years of 7.5% compared to like, what, 3%. But the fact of the matter is, no matter what happens, there's no incentive to change the system. Social Security, for instance, has always been referred to as the third rail. You're a politician, you touch it, you get zapped. You raise retirement age. Nobody likes that. Certainly not AARP, very strong lobbying group. You could lift the cap on taxable income. That's something that you could possibly do. Or you could actually get rid of the system altogether and implement another system that's not going to be a priority whatsoever. Politicians have no incentive to act, because as long as politicians are interested only in promoting their own goals, and that's to stay in office, then there's no reason to actually act on this time bomb until it's too late. And when it goes into crisis mode, that's a situation where you have probably 18% tax rate on employer and employee. FICA taxes work that way. Employee, employer. If you're self-employed, you get double taxed. It's not a sustainable system. Yes.
So there are folks out there who adhere to the MMT, modern monetary theory.
Right.
Question in regard to the incentive to monetize debt. So we'll never miss a payment. We just have to print it. So we won't miss a payment. And there's that idea that that is free money versus its effect on the consumer and producer in terms of value of income.
Right.
But there is a perspective that says that if we were to keep that debt stable, its percentage of GDP over time hovers as opposed to increases.
Right.
Because of inflation, because of intentionally producing inflation.
Right.
We would sort of speak on that balance between whether or not we have to scoop that out of earnings, or whether or not they're just going to monetize it.
Well, I mean, when you're dealing with fiat currency, and again, this is, going into monetary policy, I know that MMT has been a theory that has been most recently promoted by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, right?
Well, I wouldn't laugh at it, because Stephanie Pelton, Bernie Sanders' advisor, you have Lauren Mosberg, you have Stephen King. It is, everybody just like, hey, socialism is bad. I had this argument with several other libertarians. MMT is gaining real traction, and it is very attractive when described correctly. It is very persuasive, and to just I'm not saying you are, but I know a lot of libertarians, fiscal conservatives, and all sorts of, yeah, MMT. And toss it to the side, and you're going to get done in, because it sounds too good to be true. And if marketed and sold right, you're going to win votes with it. So just my feedback on MMT.
No, okay, so I'm curious, so if marketed and sold right, what does that look like to you?
Well, see, your government debt is the creation of private wealth.
Right.
And taxation is just to cool the economy, steer behavior, maybe create, do away with some of the income wealth. There's no reason to tax it. You can print the money.
Right.
You're simply using tax to manipulate the economy. It's not even to pay off debt. The debt doesn't really exist.
Right.
The debt is just private wealth you created by printing. And suddenly people then don't feel bad about it. And that's a very slippery slope. And there's reasons it's not good. But if you don't view debt as an issue, suddenly you're not even having the conversation, on the left, you're not even having a conversation at that point. Because the debt doesn't matter. Your debt is not a concern at that point. It's private wealth.
Right. And I think too, the manipulation of the markets through inflation is also probably along the lines of that slippery slope as well. And that's something that I've talked to students quite a bit about, when it comes time to talk about, monetary policy and sort of the trouble that we get ourselves into. The Fed's always used this term of quantitative easing and price inflation, and looking at it over time. And you notice that some of the underlying mechanisms create these distortions, sort of drive investment into other places that they normally wouldn't go to, had that not been the case. Any other questions?
I talked to a congressman 30 years ago, before the debt was even $1 trillion. And I kept talking about the debt back then, that I'm working for him in Michigan. And he told me Washington's dirty little secret is the debt isn't real because the money isn't real. They can just print out more. I don't think Republicans or Democrats really care about that, because they know Rothschild's day, the money isn't really real. As long as the people believe it's worth something, they're going to go till $100 trillion.
I mean, that's a good point. I think that when we do talk about fiat currency and sort of the rates of inflation, as of recently. You start pumping money into, it's this notion that you start pumping credits into banks, right? You start, the Federal Reserve is buying bonds from the banks, you're pumping credits into it. And the notion is that you'll never ever have that cash, those credits hit the economy all at once. It's injected in those upfront capital investments. We'll see the benefit of that. And then the average American eventually, unfortunately, will suffer from the plight of price inflation. So as it starts to circulate the economy, you have those early risers who are able to get to that new credit for capital investment. We'll see the most benefit from it. And then, go ahead.
What Steve was just saying, if money's not real and they can just print more, Federal Reserve is doing that, then the debt is not real.
Right.
So they are constantly printing money. So they make up some number for political reasons. You have some kind of debt issue.
Right.
When really they can just print it up. Money's not backed by anything.
Right.
It's not backed by gold, it's not backed by silver. So what is debt if the Federal Reserve can print as much money as they want?
Right. I mean, I see that point. I think ultimately, though, what's going to is that it's going to be more sort of instead of long-term but short-term redirection of investments that will sort of cause this quicker turn to recessions, which will end up hurting Americans overall. And I think that's when you're going to start to see more support for redistribution programs and whatnot. Yes.
So question on that then, there's somewhere there's a balance between harm against productivity by not inserting that cash versus devaluation by inserting that cash.
Right.
And how would you see defining that balance between you insert it to maintain productivity versus you don't insert it and you harm productivity?
I don't know. I mean, that's a tough question. I think that, sometimes, we see this natural business cycle that pertains to underlying issues within the economy that we can't see right away. And when you start creating these distortions through injection of new credit, you're leading people to invest what normally they would save, right? That if you look at long-term issues, saving is good when in the long term you start to see investment rise ultimately because of that at the right time. These distortions, I think that they'll start to, people will benefit, and then later on down the road, once you start getting into recession, things are going to change.
So, yes, quantitative easing, it increases print money, but it's really just adds to the computers at this point. Do they ever do the opposite? Take money out of the.
When the money gets too old.
No, taking money out of the stream.
No, that goes to somebody's pocket.
Well,
No, you know what I mean? Like quantitative easing sounds like you're taking money out of the supply stream, but you're actually putting money into the computer manipulation pretty much.
right. You're printing money out of thin air.
Yeah, you're printing out of thin air, and you're getting credit. Right. Is there the opposite of that?
Well, I mean, the Federal Reserve oftentimes will want to contract the money supply. And so it forces banks to buy bonds. And so it contracts the level of vulnerable reserves. And so that kind of starts to snowball effect. But
So forcing banks to buy bonds or increasing credit, because you never really hear of that. You always hear of the target.
right.
Yeah, where they injected so much cash into the economy, where that? And my question always was, when are they taking that out?
Right. Well, the target, I mean, again, that goes back to the banking crisis, the subprime mortgage crisis. It goes back to that notion that the subprime mortgage crisis, that you had this government mandate of increasing home ownership. I see that implicit guarantee on behalf of,
Ban incentives.
right, yeah, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac that just created this feeding frenzy on Wall Street. Because you know that secondary mortgage market was needed to grow in order to free up capital to issue more mortgages.
Packages, derivatives.
Right, exactly. And so you created all these, this financial haul of years, but ultimately was this grand idea of having increased home ownership, right? And you think of that as like the American dream, right? Everybody should own a home, but the problem is that, you know, you're removing any type of market incentives, those market signals that really drive people to buy a home when it's the right time. Instead, you had, I think there's a story in California where you had gardeners making minimum wage who were buying $500,000 homes, right? Nobody cared. They were giving mortgages and then passing them off to Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and they were creating those collateralized debt obligations. And there's no incentive for them to not. The incentive was in place for the banks to actually.
And what was the insurance thing though?
Was that the credit default swap?
Yeah, credit default swap, which was ridiculous from a legal perspective.
Right.
I can't insure somebody's house.
but the fact of the matter is that government mandates, you know, because they knew that, you know, a lot of times Wall Street was blamed, right? And, you know, you have these Occupy Wall Street movements. And they still continue on to this day. Wall Street is blamed for it, but when you really look at what created the incentives, it was that government policy. Especially when you know that they're going to be buying up these mortgages, packaging them off as bonds, selling them off as bonds. You create the incentives. Did Wall Street act badly? Did they make poor financial moves? They engineered this financial disaster? They did so because the incentives were in place. That policy was in place. Increased home ownership. Expand the secondary mortgage market, right? And so they're taking these bonds in, these mortgages in, creating bonds when they probably shouldn't have been.
And then the reverse looking back.
Right. Absolutely. Yes.
So I have a political question as opposed to an economic question. A few moments ago when David asked you about the MMT, now I'm going to paraphrase and please correct me if I'm wrong, but basically your response was that your prognosis is that the situation is going to continue to deteriorate, and what will happen is there'll be more and more pressure for redistributive policies like wealth taxes and more income taxes and the additional extra FICA thing to pay the debt and so on and so forth. So libertarians, of course, fight the good fight in terms of trying to be responsible financially. But I guess your advice to us would be that that's a losing strategy, because what's ultimately going to happen is going to be more support for redistributive policies. And so our best bet is to move to Costa Rica?
The skies look like they don't hurt. They don't hurt. I think that was David's point, right? That the distributive processes like Social Security for not Social Security, Medicare for all are disguised.
So the central concern I have is if you can make debt not even be debt by just playing with the language. You need to have some understanding. And you started to, I think you kind of worked it out in the sense that when government's printing the money and then through taxes and regulation deciding where it goes, then government, in partnership with private banks and fractional reserve banking, creates the bubble.
Right.
And they manipulate the economy and blow it up. And that's the danger that libertarians can be warning against that shows the damage MMT. Because from my perspective, we've been living MMT, right? Since 1971, when we went off the gold standard. We are in an MMT. I mean, part of MMT is they describe the economy as they see it now. And for a lot of them, they can go, hey, it's not so bad, we're just not quite doing it right. You know, perfect example of government, right? Government's great, we're just not doing it right. Right. You know, and every libertarian is used to hearing that argument. Government can do better if we just do it right. And so those are the kind of arguments I think we need to work on, and that's why it's important to understand MMT going forward, because the left is using it like a sledgehammer.
I think politically what he's saying is you can make some things that are not really realistic from a debt perspective. If there's no debt with MMT, look really attractive, because hey, we're now get rid of the 65 for Medicare. Everybody gets Medicare for free.
Oh, right.
And then this thing gets really screwed.
Right.
Donut.
And I mean, it does go back to sort of like this political language too. Like when you look, going back to Social Security, this notion of a trust fund, right? I think that you have this sort of inherent meaning in the idea of a trust fund, right? It does make people feel secure. Hey, we've been running surpluses for so long now. You know, we've developed this trust fund. Well, what are you doing? You're actually just funding the government in the meantime. You're funding this ever-increasing level of spending, everything from defense, fighting wars. You know, we'll be paying on these wars forever. Future generations will be paying on them. The interest from them will be far greater than the actual cost of the war, fighting the war themselves, right? So you create this notion of an implicit meaning of trust fund. All you're doing is funding spending, right? What if politicians did this? What if they said, well, we'll base FICA taxes on projections. So we're going to run a surplus. Instead of buying treasuries with that surplus, what if instead of running a surplus and buying treasuries, we take that surplus and we actually put it towards the deficit, right? And then we start charging FICA taxes. We change the rate of FICA taxes. That continue on. They change in relation to projections of cost for future retiring populations, right? They could do that, but your taxes would go up through the roof. There's no political sense.
36 of the self-employment tax scares the hell out of them.
Yeah, and it should, absolutely.
Going back to the politics, which we are at the point. American politics is based on envy and fear.
Right.
Most people will start rolling their eyes if you talk about, I had to look up NFT because I didn't know that until just now. But the whole theory is, the rich are evil and you need to take all their money because they've got to do a job. At what point, and if libertarians start talking about economic policy to the general public, we're never going to gain any traction. So what I'm thinking is, at what point will the system close? When we're talking about constantly putting money, it actually gets up to 22, 23, 24, 25. At what point will it be totally unsustainable? The federal government will not be able to simply pay. When they start cutting 70-year-old Social Security, when they start reducing it, not necessarily not increasing it, but reducing it, then you're going to know a lot of old people pissed off and they may vote out one set of rascals for the other set of rascals. But what I'm talking about is, when we get to the at-the-stroke point where the federal government simply cannot pay. Cannot pay Social Security, cannot pay Medicare, cannot even pay military pensions. I get all three of those.
Right.
So at what point do I have to move to the Philippines? That's what I want.
There's in the Philippines.
If I live long enough, if I can go to an island. If I live long enough, 10, 20, 30 years, assuming nothing changes.
Assuming nothing changes, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, if you look at projections and, redemptions from the Social Security Trust Fund will end 2034. There won't be enough receipts to cover expenditures, and you'll be only getting Social Security will only be paying out 3 quarters per payment, and the rest of the government. I mean, okay, I think this snowball will start to continue. And I think that I talk to my wife about this all the time. That it's unsustainable. And spending will only increase, right? People are always seeking more and more and more. These are programs, we should not just base, like Thomas Sowell always said, you shouldn't base it on, your intentions. Examine the consequences and redirect at that point. But we're notoriously bad at that in this country. There's a lot of rhetoric that's spiraling out there. who knows? Like, honestly, I don't have I don't have that answer. I don't even want to purport to know, at what point is it going to get so bad. But it's definitely something to consider. Yes.
I've been hearing about that the central banks are planning for a reset. They're going to reset the currency and change the monetary policy and probably eliminate all the debt and just try to start everything over. Have you heard tell of that? Change it to the dollar to a special drawing right to the SDR instead of a.
Well, I've heard a little bit. I mean, I read a report a while back from the International Bank of Settlements, and I mean, it's kind of they're nerve-wracking because it's really drawing attention to this debt crisis that's coming through in most of the developed world. And again, it doesn't really mention it outright, but it seems like it starts to direct towards a time when you have more developed countries, the United States in particular, moving from a commodity-backed currency to a fiat currency, and this tendency to start printing money at ever-increasing rates. So I don't know. I'm not quite sure.
Just so, China is on here.
Yeah, 47%, I saw that.
On this chart, so I don't know what that means.
Oh, China?
Yeah.
It's at the top there, but what he's saying is that it's mythical, that the 47% is not believable.
I understand what it's saying, just keep offering it.
Okay,
You
yeah, so-
definitely have the demographic time bomb.
You could say that about any country.
Probably true.
I don't understand why people are sketchy and say Burundi or.
So I guess so like 20-something years ago, there was a big paranoia type fear that we're going cashless in our society. And we're gonna get some chip in our hand to be able to pay. Europe. So is that something that's happening, or like, what's going on with that? Like the Antichrist coming and all that?
Could I ask that question?
Yeah. We got two people.
When is the Antichrist?
We got two people haven't had a chance to ask or say anything yet.
So, when we go back to the debt crisis, how long, I don't think you can really predict exactly when, because you have to have a confidence crisis, and that happens when the government starts printing money, more or less, and people start losing purchasing power.
Right.
But I think my question is, how long do you think they could keep this up? I mean, you look at Japan, I think Japan's kind of like the beacon for all of this whole fiat system. I mean, what are the projections, I guess, with this, interest payments on debt and what have you? How long do you think the United States can keep this going? What's the longest this can go?
I mean, I don't know. Again, it goes back to that question of trying to predict what growth will bring in terms of like increased receipts. So a lot of times, you look at, there's a lot of talk, the Donald Trump tax cuts, right, increasing the deficit, and then down the road, seeing economic growth that will ultimately start to close that gap because of increased revenue. So you have increased government receipts because of economic growth, and then previously you had those tax cuts. I think a lot of it has to do maybe with faith as well, right? I mean, you look at the Greek system, and when I was in Greece, you had I was there when the IMF was there, and IMF was there for austerity talks, and people were rioting in the streets, and there's so many people who were discussing the fact that, we can't believe that we're talking about austerity at a time when like nobody was paying their taxes, right? And you also had nobody paying your taxes every other day. Subway, metro system workers are striking. They want ever-increasing benefits. They want ever-increasing levels of pay. It's a system that's unsustainable, and more people are losing their faith and not even paying their taxes whatsoever. And yeah, go ahead.
So I think this, it goes back into legal tender laws as well. Right now we can't really trade in gold or what have you. Since the government will crack down on you. I think there was a private currency in gold that got shut down during 2008. I can't remember the name off the top of my head. But I think that's one of the ways that government is pure force and just prevents the free market from correcting itself. And What do you think the chances are that we'll see maybe a repeal of some of these legal tender laws? You know, I know Ron Paul did some stuff and did that and what have you. Is there any sort of grass movement and maybe someone else can jump in too?
Yeah, no, I mean, if you want to jump in, by all means. No, I mean, that's a good question. I don't think I could really say for sure on that one.
Well, is there any major country that doesn't have a fiat currency?
Doesn't have fiat currency? I mean, I'm not off the top of my head, I think, yeah, go ahead.
Well, expanding on that a little bit, the black market currencies like Bitcoin, how would that impact as a bank or not? I'm not asking you for a precision measurement of anything, but as a general direction, would that tend to, what would it tend to do publicly? The existence of the black market currencies or alternative currencies broadly speaking.
Well, I mean, there's so many like alternative currencies and cryptocurrencies that have been out there. You know, Bitcoin's value's been just kind of like all over the place. But you do see a lot more sort of like microcurrencies that are popping up, especially in places in South America, right? Where Venezuela, for instance, right? You know, that socialist wonder place that is Venezuela right now. Yeah, absolutely. And Chile has done a phenomenal job of promoting economic growth. You know, of course, you know, you got Pinochet and you had all these economic free market reforms, but in so many other places in South America, you've seen more and more individuals going back to creating almost a microcurrency where you have this trading that's going on with basically, you know, what we would consider like a commodity-backed currency, but at the micro level. You know, there's the island of stone money, right? Milton Friedman wrote an article on this in his book, Money Mayhem, but at that same token, you're going back to these sort of micro commodity-backed currencies because a lot of cultures are able to operate a bit more freely and see more growth through that than they are through the national fiat currencies.
Now, I was looking at your deficits and the debt.
Right.
And if you look at the timeline, it's pretty clear some events that happened during these
Right.
I would be curious to see if you went back to World War II to see what the cost of World War II versus Vietnam versus the first Iraq War versus the second Iraq War. Or you go back to World War I just to see. Because obviously, if you look at the second Iraq conflict versus the end of the Vietnam War, it's almost like triple, quadruple the cost.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And what would the next war cost?
Well, you know, we'll be paying on this war.
Because you're still paying for this.
Yeah, we are, and future generations will be. I mean, we'll be paying interest rates much greater than the actual cost of combat operations.
Yeah.
I actually wanted to challenge you. I know you said you wrote your last editorial or article on we'll put a debt clock in the classroom. I'm a civics economics teacher.
Okay.
We actually look at the debt clock, I'm not saying on a daily basis, but definitely weekly basis. And what's interesting is I did it in high school and I had seniors come back to me and be like, Mr. Taylor, have you seen the debt clock? It's going up so much. And so I'm gonna challenge you, and honestly, as a teacher, I believe that you're your own leader in your classrooms. I'm not forcing you anything to do it, but I would recommend you doing it at least once a week and get your kids to kind of, and regardless if we think the debt's real or not, you know, they're struggling, let's be real, right?
Right.
So let them see that and let them see the numbers go, because once they see the numbers go, their head's going to go. Obviously, you know, don't throw your political leaning in it. You know,
Right.
We gotta do what we gotta do as a teacher, right? But, you know, get them in the right direction and start to get them to question stuff, right?
Right.
Figure out where this money's going. Why is it going so damn fast? You know, like, and start to figure out, and once you do that, you'll really start to see, because they're as interested as we make them to be, right? So if you make it interesting for them and you're like, oh, look what just happened, just made in another country.
Right.
Well, I wonder if this is going to make the debt clock go up, you know?
Right.
And like by doing that, you're kind of, again, you're leading them in the right direction. Because, you know, and I know some of the other teachers over there don't see if you're going to look, but I know they look great. So, you know, use that in your classroom. You are right here in the front lines before they go into the analysis, whatever. You are, you know, we're molding them. So get them to think critically. Get them to question stuff outside of the notebooks, outside of the textbooks. Get them to go farther than that. So I'm just saying, challenge you on your own articles. That's what I'm doing. doing that. So again, I don't know if you did it or not. You will. So
Well, no, I mean,
I challenge you on it, man.
no, I did. You know, at first I just kind of did it almost, you know, like tongue in cheek, like satirical. But then we have a pre-engineering program at our school, so I've actually talked to the individual who teaches that and runs that, and so it looks like that's going to be a project that students can do. They're going to find a way of creating an LED clock for the classroom. They're going to get credit for it in their pre-engineering program, connect it to Wi-Fi, make sure that it's getting data transmitted in real time. So I think that was something that we're actually going to go forward with.
Because you know, we gotta work with what we got. So
That's right. That's right.
You know, I got a projector and a laptop, so that's what I got.
So we got a gentleman here.
So looking at it looks like, you know, the debt started significantly going up after like the 80s, during the Reagan era, basically. I just wonder whether you can pinpoint specific policies that you might have done to change the economy that would have, you know, direct contributed to the rise in the national debt.
So I know that under Reagan you had the Greenspan Commission. You also had some issues with increasing taxation and then reduction in taxation. So you had this deficit that was so you had a decrease in deficit and then a spike in deficit as well. And then this goes on further to presidency of George H.W. Bush, where you had this looming deficit crisis. I think George H.W. Bush, of course, he was famous for this statement of "read my lips, no new taxes." And of course, you had to deal with deficits. So, like any good politician, he just did it anyway. Don't cut spending, right? But increase taxes to meet current spending levels.
All right. I appreciate we're coming up on an hour. It's a little longer than normal. So obviously, everyone enjoyed the conversation. So the WakeLP exchanged some fiat currency with the establishment, and you may exchange that for food or beverage in the future. So thank you for coming out. It was a great conversation. I'm glad we had it. And another round of applause. I know there were some concerns in the past a little bit about we were having to throw things up here quick, but I think Santana did a fantastic job this evening. Thank you. If no further questions, I'm going to wrap up the formal part of this presentation and end this video. And thank you all for coming out. Bye.